Welcome to Trading the Close. My name is Lawton Ho, and this is,
Drew Dosick, hello.
and we're in a little bit different of a setup. We're still in the office, but we decided to do it from our computers for the meanwhile. So I hope that doesn't bother anyone.
No, it
But
makes it a
yeah,
lot easier. Yeah,
Drew, today is a crazy day in the markets, right?
absolutely insane. Yeah, the news coming out of China with the cheaper, faster AI using less semiconductor powers is really disrupting the market, especially NVIDIA.
All right, well, let's just kind of hop into it, Drew. Talk me through what you see here, what
All
we're looking
right.
at.
You see at the top of my screen right here, it's a little small, but we got the SPX down 1.5%. The Qs are down 3%. SMH is the big story of the day, is down 10%. But the IWM is only down 1.13%. Think about that. The small caps aren't really getting hit that hard. It's the semis. And what have we said in the past? When the semis fail, you better bail. So this is a warning sign and shot across the bow for every other sector out there. And so we look at the S&P 500 index on the heat map here. Here's what I was talking about. Look at NVIDIA down here, 17.14% down today. Google is also down 4%. Microsoft is down. But look at this one big dog that's up. Meta is up 1.69%. We're going to get into the reason why a little bit later, but also Apple is up. So there are still some shining stocks amongst this big red day across the board for the markets.
Yeah, and before we move any further, I know you said something briefly about Chinese stocks. So can you explain to our viewers out there who may not be that familiar? They just see NVIDIA's down 17%. So what actually was said about, and why is everything red?
Yeah. So the claim, and I touched on it just a little bit. There's an AI developing company out of China called DeepSeek. Now, this company over the weekend released news that they were able to generate better AI results than OpenAI and faster results, all doing it on less advanced semiconductor chips. So they weren't having to go out and buy the most expensive NVIDIA AI chips, which are very, very expensive. And a lot of companies here in the United States have invested heavily in those AI chips to help build out their data centers. So now what we're starting to see and find out is that there's a potential that these companies aren't going to have to spend as much. And in essence, what that's doing is it's reducing revenue share for NVIDIA, because now if companies have an alternate option to go somewhere else and get these semiconductor chips at a cheaper price and get the job done equally or even better than what they're paying, they're not going to pay as much money. So what that's going to do in the future, in my opinion, is put pressure on NVIDIA because that's now going to start reducing their margins. So you're starting to see a mass exodus out of NVIDIA just because of that.
Okay, and that, I guess, that spread to the rest of the sector too. I see ABGO is down 17%, a bunch of stuff, but I'm sure you're going to get into all of it. So take us through the S&P, Drew.
Yeah. So if you guys remember, just this last week, I was talking to you all about this parallel. Lawton and I did a show mainly on parallels to show you guys the power of them. This is the same parallel that I had up before on the S&P 500. Notice how when price went up into it, we had the show this day with this narrow body bar. There was an additional attempt to break up into the parallel, and it did so successfully. But as you notice, it did not confirm. We came back down the following day on Friday, and then today, look at the massive drop. So we did have a bounce from the lows on the S&P 500. However, a big down day on the SPX, which likely is going to lead to potentially more down days. You see here, I've got a line in the sand basically right here is support for the S&P 500. But then we also have this upper end of support, which is the bottom portion of that parallel.
Yeah, and I see it gap down and has come up. So do you think in the short term, like for this week, right, if you had to kind of put your finger on the pulse and see where this is headed over the course of the rest of this week, where would you expect? Continue another bounce or a pullback?
Well, that's a really good question. This week, when you consider just the charts, I would say the likelihood that we should potentially go back up, maybe even fill this gap is high. However, the caveat, and there's really a couple. We have the FOMC meeting taking place this week. We're going to have the results on Wednesday. Normally, when these big meetings with the massive amount of information that JP is going to have to digest and also give back to us, the investors, a lot of investors hold tight on their investments. They don't make that many moves before we know exactly what JP is going to say. So I would say normally we would probably head back up, but with the FOMC taking place this week, I doubt, I bet it's going to be a smaller bounce until that releasement comes on Wednesday. And then after that, the data is not over with, because then we have the PCE data released on Friday. So it's a lot of information to go through this, and it's really not a clear-cut answer. Generally speaking, though, a big drop like this, and we're coming into some area of support, we should potentially bounce right back up, retest this lower end of the parallel before heading down.
Yeah, and not to mention all the earnings that are coming up this week, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you got Apple, you got Tesla. Starbucks is tomorrow. Tesla is Wednesday. Meta, IBM is also on Wednesday, and then Apple's on Thursday. So you're exactly right, Lawton. We got the FOMC, PCE data, and then earnings. So a lot of information is going to be hitting us this week. FOMC for right now is the one I'm mainly paying attention to, because that's going to move the whole market. Rather than just these individual stocks with earnings, but still very important to pay attention to.
Yep, let's check out the Qs.
All right, so Qs, you remember last week also, we broke above this parallel. We had a nice breakout and confirmed above, and then today we're getting rejected right back into this parallel on the Qs. This is the daily chart. So that tells me too, if the Qs even move up tomorrow, this area is going to be resistance. Now, if we gap above this area on the parallel, this area on the parallel is roughly 515.57. So if we gap above that tomorrow, we'll have room to run. And much like the SPX, as I mentioned, we may have a chance to go back in and retest the bottom of that parallel, which will also coincide to the bottom end of these daily close candles.
Cool, yeah. And what do we have on the SMH, the thing that everyone is watching right now?
Yeah, this is really the market mover of the day, and this is such a significant change, guys. Remember last week, again, the focus was on parallels and how very powerful these are. And I touched on the 50% area of the parallel, as you notice right here. And notice when price went up into it, I said it's going to be really tough for it to go through with just one day of price action. It'll probably have to gap above that 50% and then continue to move. If not, probably just chop over here and then make a move up. We see clearly it chopped and then dropped. It dropped all the way down, breaking outside of this parallel. This is an extremely negative move for the SMH. Now, SMH, you'll see also, I've got this trend line that's connected here. I've been waiting, in essence, since this pivot low was placed right at the beginning of August, for price to come back into this trend line. We see it happened right here in September, but price has not yet got back into this trend line. This trend line is the line in the sand for the SMH. If we start trading beneath this trend line and have a daily close confirming beneath that level, watch out. The semis are in some serious trouble. So right now you see we're right stuck in this, like it's almost like a wedge pattern or a megaphone pattern. This megaphone pattern is really going to dictate how the semis behave moving forward. Do we break underneath this? And if so, major downside to come. Or if we break back in this parallel, we'll be able to trade amongst this parallel like we've seen in the past. And then we start talking about all-time highs again.
Yeah, so I saw that the SMH, you see it gapped open like so far down, right? Mm-hmm. It gapped open pretty far down, but continued to sell throughout the day without getting that much of a bounce. Now, coming into the next couple of days, are you expecting a bounce maybe back to the bottom of that parallel, or do you think it's going to continue moving down because the news is just so bearish?
Yeah, we've talked about this, and I think this is a great example. I'm flipping back to the SPX. Notice when we broke this parallel, what did price do? It did it on 3 different occasions. We broke, came back in and tested it, came in, broke again, came back, tested that bottom end of the parallel, came back, and then we tested it again. So whenever these parallels break, it is, and we talked about this too, the inclining parallels typically break to the downside, just like what's happening here in SMH. So what's likely going to happen with a breakdown is when you do eventually have a bounce back up to retest what we call the scene of the crime. This is so important because oftentimes people get caught up in FOMO plays, right? They see this big, huge sell, whether it's in the spiders, the Qs, or in this example, the SMH, they're like, oh man, I want to capitalize on this downward momentum. Well, then they start jumping in, shorting right here. And what happens after there, the next few days, price typically bounces back up, retesting the trend line that it broke. And then that's the place, if you wanted to jump on board for a short sell, that's where you jump on board. You don't jump in right here. The movement's already happened. Wait for that pattern to develop. And then this gives you the higher probability chance of you being correct. Play in that area because this is going to be major resistance. And one other thing I wanted to point out, just like we had touched on other charts, notice this gap down, and you mentioned it too, Lawton. This gap down, gap over support. So whenever something like that happens, it frees up that stock or it frees up that index to continue going in the direction where it gapped without much resistance. Because if it does have that resistance, it will oftentimes get support or at least change the direction of the price. So for example, if price opened here on the SMH, we likely would have bottomed out at the bottom of this parallel today and gotten a bounce or maybe even chopped around it before falling over. But since we gapped over it, that just basically it's like jumping over a river. You didn't have to go through all that effort to get through that get through that support right here.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. All right, let's move to IWM.
All right, IWM. Here, this was the one I wanted to point out. As you saw, we're only down, it says 1%, 0.94% for the day. This one stood out to me as this index had relative strength for the rest of the market. Now, we're still being controlled. Notice this big red candle. That red candle is the line in the sand to beat. Right about 233 is the top of that red candle. Should price get above this on the daily chart and close above that, now that's going to open the door for the IWM to go retest the highs. Otherwise, we're still stuck in this underneath this downward sloping trend line, pushing price lower, as you see over the last 4 trading days. That's done a really good job.
Yeah, and this type of parallel, is this our wedge pattern? Is this bullish or bearish, would you say?
This one right now, you know what? It's kind of hard to tell because if it were up here, and say the trend line we're coming in a method kind of like this, then I would say it would be more bullish. But now since we've broken down from that bullish pattern and we're contained in this bearish candle, because this is all inside bar bearish consolidation. So that tells me that as long as this line holds, we're likely coming down to this trend line and then potentially breaking on the IWM. It's for the small cap stocks. So it will be interesting to see if the next few days how folks exit NVIDIA, how institutions exit NVIDIA, and are they going to start redeploying their money into these small caps, which is what I think kind of happened today, which is why we haven't seen such a big fall on IWM.
That makes sense. All right, let's move on to the 10-year yield.
All right, 10-year yield. You see, we're not much going on here. We did have a down day, but we're still within this parallel. And I mentioned to you last week that this area of the parallel, as well as these trend lines, will provide support for the 10-year yield. So we were discussing this today. How is the 10-year falling? The markets are falling too, but this could present problems potentially. If the markets continue to fall and the 10-year yield falls, it's almost like conflicting stories. The 10-year yield falling could help out our economy and then inversely push up the markets. But if the markets are falling and the 10-year yield is falling, we have a little disconnect going on. So we'll see if that bounces right around this parallel and this trend line in the coming days.
Yeah, and before you move on, I just want to ask, is that a head and shoulders pattern forming on the 10-year yield?
Yeah, hey, good spot. You're exactly right. Yeah, on the daily chart, we can just draw it in real quick right here. Here's the neckline. So if you were to go ahead and have a move on this, I can do it for you guys real quick while we're on air right here. If you want to have a measured move, say this is the break. That's bringing yields down to 4.263, which if you notice, coincidentally, is right underneath these trend lines. We'll see how the action and how it gets there. We may hit this, bounce up, retest that scene of the crime, and then break that trend line and come down here. And we may hit that price point somewhere over here, maybe in March or February, but we'll see. That's a very good question there, Lawton.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to gold.
All right. All right. So for gold, not too much going on here with gold. We did have a down day, but that's to be understood. We've had a tremendous move up, and notice where we paused. Again, guys, the power of these parallels. They're very easy to spot and very easy to draw. And look what it can do to tell you what's going to happen with price action. You can see right here, price just moved straight up into the 50% area of this parallel. Also, previous highs are right there. We didn't quite get up to the high, but once we got up to that 50% of the parallel, the probability shifted and started to inch towards the higher probability of a downward move on gold.
Yeah. So with people maybe taking profits on the semiconductor hype, selling out, would gold be something they would consider putting their money into, or where does the money usually flow when it comes out of one of the, let's say, bubble stock sectors?
That's what we're trying to figure out now, which is why I brought up the IWM. Institutions, they have different rules than, say, retail investors. Whenever institutions get and unload major positions, they have to redeploy their cash in one area or another. They can't just sit on a whole bunch of cash. Or if they have some ability to sit on cash, it's restricted with the amounts that they sit into. So when we usually start sell-offs in the markets, usually one or two sectors get hit first. Other sectors start having inflow of money. But then when the whole market sells, all of those sectors start retreating. So just pay attention to the IWM, Qs, and the S&P 500 over the next few days. Watch those price actions, how they close, to help you determine if it's starting to become a full exit from the markets or if it's just a rotation into different sectors.
Cool. And the big one everybody's been waiting for, NVIDIA.
Yeah, look at this. So over the last several weeks, you notice a price action on NVIDIA. We've been trying to break above this trend line. And on one occasion we closed right here and closed completely above this, but then immediately got rejected back down. You notice here too, I've got this trend line that's been connecting this low right down here from September 6th, all the way across, connecting with this low in December 17th. But basically it's held price up at the high end of the charts. And then today, everything changed. And that's the thing you guys really need to take home today. We take the stairs up in the stock market, and we take the elevator down. And even one of my colleagues, Dr. B, said today, sometimes it's out the window. And that's exactly what this did. But you notice too, when price falls, and just like I had mentioned to you before, when price falls or goes up in an extreme fashion, there's always a technical level to help you find where that price is going to stop. And usually it's as simple as connecting a couple different pivots. Look here on NVIDIA, this major pivot that's standing out November 27th. And then notice the very next lower low, because this was, you see what we were going on here, or what was happening. We had a low, a lower low, and then another lower low on the charts. All I did was connect this pivot low to this pivot low and strung it out. And if I go to the 10-minute chart, you can see today that's exactly where NVIDIA got a nice bounce right into that trend line. It got a nice bounce there, came back in, tested it, got another bounce, got another, tested it again, got another bounce, pierced it, and then ultimately still finished above. So this trend line, it tells me that's a very powerful trend line. Is the sell-off over with? I don't think so. Likely this is the third hit, so we should get a decent bounce on NVIDIA, but we'll see with this negative sentiment how much of a bounce is going to occur with that. If it does continue to sell off, I've got support here at 114.59, and then this will be major support down here at 104.10. So big news on NVIDIA today. It's got a lot of room to go back and retest that scene of the crime if it does something like that. But ultimately, this trend line's the boss right now and holding price action above.
Yeah, and something about NVIDIA, it's been kind of like the darling of the stock market, right? For institutional and retail investors alike, it seems like, just past weekend, one of my friends was talking to me about, oh, I'm thinking about buying some NVIDIA, and lo and behold, the thing completely dropped. So I'm wondering if retail investors who might have get burned, maybe they're hitting the panic button. Something that you don't have prepared on your charts that I want you to talk about a little, if you don't mind, is Bitcoin. How's Bitcoin doing? How is Bitcoin doing? I mean, have we seen any rotation of capital into Bitcoin with the market sell-off?
Yes. And you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that. I have a list of a couple other things I wanted to pull up, and Bitcoin was one. So thank you for reminding me on that. You'll notice back to last week's analysis, we've got that parallel, right? But what did price action do today when we had this big sell-off? All we did was retest that 50% area of the parallel. So really right now, and how I think about it in my head, when I'm in this inclining parallel, and again, this is a very slight inclining parallel, so it could still break to the high. The more steep the parallel, the more likely price will break down from that parallel. So we could still break up above the top end of this parallel, but as long as price action stays in the top 50%, we've got a shot at going and testing the top end of the parallel. Once that 50% area is broken, next thing we're looking at is down here at the bottom of the parallel and ultimately down here at 75,000. So, what I would advise anybody interested in buying Bitcoin, like you said, your friend was doing, you've got to strategize multiple entry points for this sort of cryptocurrency. We could see Bitcoin drop down to 75,000 easily. Everything on the chart is showing me that's a possibility this year. But then I do also think Bitcoin is going to hit that $200,000 mark or $250,000 mark in the future. I'm not pegging a date to it, but ultimately I still think Bitcoin will run up that high. So where do you want to get in is the main question. You could be conservative and wait for an entry right down here at 75,000, or you can just leg in. 1% if it breaks this 50% of the parallel, or another 1% right here at the bottom, another 1 or 2% here at 75. And just because I drew a line on my chart saying 75 is a target doesn't mean price will stop there and then continue moving higher till eternity. We could even push beneath these levels. So leave yourself some room to add, especially when you're looking at a long-term hold, something like Bitcoin.
Totally understand. I mean, and that makes sense. I mean, we talked about it last week, different strategies trying to make money as Bitcoin is going up. But of course, nothing usually doesn't go up in a straight line, right? There are trades. And that's where we as traders, make our money. What other things that you want to talk about, Drew?
We got Tesla on Wednesday. And Tesla, I did want to point out, too, that this area, the 340 area, is going to be major, major support. So Tesla's earnings are coming out on Wednesday, but notice how price action broke out above this declining trend line and how price is trying to come back down and retest it. But also notice I've got several other areas of support. We'll clean that up just a little bit so that you see these are the two lines that I'm paying attention to right now. Over the next 2 days, we'll see where Tesla sets itself up for prior to earnings. That way I've got resistance levels above, support areas beneath, that I'm ready to take action on with Tesla. If we pull over to Meta, I mentioned Meta had a great update today, but look where we're at. We're right into resistance. That all I did was connect a trend line from here to this pivot high, and you see the price action cut right through it today. I did take a short in the live day trading room on this stock today, mainly because of this 50% parallel and this trend line. So I had two factors going into this, helping me out with the probabilities of this trade. But one reason Meta's up, and one might say, well, wait a second, tech got hit so hard. Why is Meta up? Well, Meta has been an investor in buying some of these chips with NVIDIA. So for the fact that some of these new AI chips are coming out at a reduced cost, ultimately is going to help Meta should they decide to go ahead and purchase these less expensive semiconductor chips to get the same job done that they're looking to do with AI and their Meta space. So I think that's why Meta started getting a lot of push today. They're not heavily involved with making these chips and having to worry about revenue on selling these chips. They're purchasing these chips. So sounds to me like they're going to be getting stuff on sale in the future.
Yeah, and before you move off of Meta, I mean, Meta has earnings in 2 days, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just created a brand new all-time high. So some people might be thinking, oh, I'll just short it into earnings. Is that all-time highs? I'll just short it into earnings. Is that a good strategy?
Blindly, no. Will it work out this time? Potentially. Yeah, it very well could. But what I would caution anybody doing that is notice this parallel, the high end of it, and we're going to have earnings on Wednesday, which is right where my cursor is here. The high end of this parallel is at 704. So if you are looking to short, just keep in mind, and you always got to do that too. Whenever you get into a trade, you got to say, all right, if I'm wrong here, where's my next level? Or if I'm wrong here, where can I add to make sure that when my thesis is proven correctly, I can capitalize and make money. So every time you do that with a trade, just always got to have it. You got to have a plan A, B, and C. Because again, like everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And so as long as you have the A, B, C, that's okay. I'm not worried about it. If this level A is not working out, my thesis is still good. I got B to go with. So I'm almost cheering for that price to get to that next target so I can get a better average in my position.
Cool. All right. Do you have any more charts for me, Drew?
One more we'll just glance at because we'll have more to go through throughout the week. We'll look at Apple since they have earnings too on Thursday. But we'll take a closer look on this on Wednesday to get a better idea of what we're looking at. But you can see here this major trend line. We had price action bump up above it today. One thing I'm watching tomorrow is to see if Apple confirms above this candle tomorrow. If so, that's telling me we're headed right up here. Otherwise, earnings could be tough for Apple. But one other reason why Apple bounced so much, look at this fall that Apple's already had. Right here. So we fell down Apple almost 15%, and we're starting to get a bounce. Many of these other stocks like NVDA that did receive the big fall wasn't already down 15%. So that's another reason why I think Apple received a lot of inflow of cash, people exiting NVIDIA and jumping into Apple since it was at a discounted price.
Cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Drew. And before we end it off, guys, and I close up with Drew, we have a word from our sponsor, Legacy Network. All right, guys, I just finished that part. Super interesting. Now, let's see if I can't do well on this mini game. So Scrabble. Looks like we got that with the XP boost. Only took me a minute to do that. We've moved up to the top 3%. We're now top 3% in the entire world. Ranked 7,186, top 1,000. I'm coming for you. I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right, guys. So yeah, I've been playing this Legacy app, Legacy Academy app, and I've been learning so much, going through the different courses and improving my ranking. My goal is to get to the top 1,000 or maybe higher, but stay tuned for more. All right, guys. With that being said, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Lawton Ho, and this is...
I'm Drew Dosick. Thanks a bunch, guys.
And we hope you have a great rest of your day and good luck in the markets, guy. Have a good one. Take it easy, guys.
We'll see ya. Way to go, Lawton.